The problem I mean, there's a million problems with this story, and we'll get on to the element that we're having shortly. But the most obvious problem is it lets politicians off the hook. Isn't it extraordinary that you've got two previous Home Secretaries, Priti Patel and Suella Braverman, trying to use this case to make political capital? I mean, all the Tories are trying to use it to make political capital about immigration in general and asylum applications in particular. They have been in charge for 14 years. I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary that the failure, the backlog, well, they've renamed the backlog, I think, this week. There is nothing illiberal or fascistic about a system which determines people aren't allowed to stay here or shouldn't be here and removing them. That is not left versus right. That is rules versus anarchy. When they make the rules disgusting or when they take away anybody's right to get here, including people who are desperate for our protection, then it is fascistic. When you have Suella Braverman being asked in a select committee by a fellow Conservative MP how somebody escaping, for example, a terrible situation, a war, persecution, famine in a country where with which we don't have any form of arrangement at the moment. If you ask Suella Braverman what a legal route, in fact, can we dig that clip out? It was Tim Loughton asking her, because this doesn't get played often enough. They make all this noise about it, but deep down they know there's no safe route. These people can't get into. No, so, by all means say we don't want another kinder transport. We don't want anybody coming from anywhere, but be honest about it. Don't pretend that there are safe and legal routes. But there's nothing illiberal or unpleasant about saying if you have come here for asylum and you have committed a sex crime, your asylum application is over. Once the conviction is in place, the application is over. Then you've got other problems, such as where do you send somebody? You can't deport people to an unsafe country, but equally, you can't expect to stay here if you have committed a crime while applying for asylum. Once your application has been accepted, you've got the same rights that I've got. And that is absolutely how it should be. We don't have second and first class citizens in this country. Once you're a citizen, once you've got a right to remain, that's it. There's no talk about being guests or hosts or any of that nonsense. I appreciate not everybody understands that or agrees with it, but the alternative is some sort of caste system whereby you've got more rights according to how many branches there are on your family tree, and that would be ridiculous. So there's a lot going on with this story, and the sight of right-wing politicians who have been in charge of immigration policy and in charge of the asylum system for 14 years, trying to use it to score some sort of political point, or indeed right-wing commentators who've been cheerleading for every Conservative Prime Minister since David Cameron. And you almost get a prize now if you can name them all in a row. But should we try David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, all of them? It's not a Tory paper in the country that hasn't been cheerleading for every single one of them, and they've done nothing on the. So even if, like me, you don't think it's the biggest problem that the country's facing, if you do think it's one of the biggest problems that the country's facing, if you've swallowed the snake oil, you've been distracted from the state of the NHS, you've been distracted from austerity, you've been distracted from the fact that nurses are using food banks, you've been distracted from the fact that the most common reason why a child goes to hospital in this country now is to have a rotten tooth extracted, you've been distracted from the cost of living, you've been distracted from the fact that the Brexit they promised you would be brilliant is costing you a fortune, you've been distracted from the fact that you might not be able to pay your mortgage as a Tory MP who says he can't live on 120 grand a year because his mortgage, a Tory MP, because his mortgage, you've been distracted from all of that and you're obsessed with immigration, or you're obsessed with small boats, you're obsessed with refugees. It's the politicians that have been in charge for 14 years you should be angry with. Extraordinary to me that they've got the brass neck to pretend that this is an issue that they should be trusted with. So appealing to sometimes xenophobic voters, sometimes even racist voters, sometimes just frightened voters. People like Braverman and Priti Patel and honest Bob Jenrick saying they've all had jobs in the bloody Home Office, these people. It's Rosamond kindly and somewhat embarrassingly mentioned my book at the end of that interview a moment ago. But the point I make repeatedly in How They Broke Britain, which hasn't come back into the Sunday Times bestsellers 3 months after publication by accident, is because people are talking about it and telling each other about it and recommending it. Because I'll tell you for nothing, it's not going to get much coverage in the media that gets absolutely lambasted on almost every page. That's what they do. They let nonsense pass. They let people who are responsible for a problem campaign on a platform promising to fix the problem they're responsible for. It's absolutely extraordinary. Extraordinary. And they know the truth. That's the point. They know the truth. I'm going to play you this, but what we're going to talk about is actually the Christian element of this character's asylum application. And again, Braverman and Patel now queuing up to condemn people who are converting to Christianity, claiming it's some sort of easy pass. But here is Suella Braverman being quizzed by Tim Lawton at the Home Affairs Select Committee only in November of 2022. And this should really be played every time she opens her mouth in public. This and the time she claimed that there wouldn't be a bill to pay to the European Union in the event of leaving the European Union. This is the point of my book. They lie. And they lie and they lie again. And if they don't get called out for it, they will lie again and again and again and again. So here's Suella Braverman on the subject of how you can come here as a genuine refugee in a manner that would have to be described by people like her as, quote, legal, end quotes.
Just a bit of role play. I'm a 16-year-old orphan from an East African country escaping a war zone and religious persecution. And I have a sibling legally in the United Kingdom at the moment. What is a safe and legal route for me to come to the United Kingdom?
Well, we have... you're fleeing which country, sorry?
Any African country.
Any African country. Well...
Be any continent, but let's say any African country. I don't want to name one because then their Prime Minister might have a go at me for demonising their population. So let's just theoretically talk about an African country which is going through a period of turbulence and which is persecuting its citizens, including an innocent 16-year-old like me.
Well, we have an asylum system and people can put in applications for asylum.
How would I do that?
Well, you can do it through the safe and legal routes that we have. We have offered 390,000 places to people seeking safety from various countries around the world.
I'm not Syrian, I'm not Afghan, I'm not Ukrainian, not any of those specific schemes. The Dub scheme is historic. What scheme's open to me?
Well, if you are able to get to the UK, you are able to put in an application for asylum.
But I would only enter the UK illegally then, wouldn't I?
Well, that would, if you put in your application for asylum upon arrival, that would be the process that you enter.
How could I arrive in the UK if I didn't have permission to get onto an aircraft legally to arrive in the UK?
Let me just invite other colleagues if there's anything they want to add.
I mean, you could engage with UNHCR. I mean, depending which country you're from, you could engage with UNHCR, and that would be a way of getting leave to enter the UK in order to put in an asylum claim. But I accept that there are some countries where that would not be possible.
I think the point is that there's a shortage of safe and legal routes, other than for specific groups of people that we have generously offered safe haven to.
It's extraordinary. I know that it's a bit depressing that other people don't point this out on a regular basis, but she didn't pause. She came out of that meeting, carried on with precisely the same rhetoric about illegals and about illegal routes when there aren't any legal ones for a huge number of people, quite possibly facing genuine persecution. So listen, I count three. I count three constituencies of people here. People who didn't understand, didn't know that was the case when they arrived at the conclusion that everybody coming here should be stopped, and now realise that Suella Braverman is a large part of the problem and certainly not the solution. Then you've got people who did understand it all and who grasped the unpleasantness of her position from the start. And then you've got the people that she's appealing to, the people who now, whether they knew or didn't know before she admitted there in select committee that there are no safe routes for people like the one Tim Lawton described, they don't care. That's the Faragist rump of this country. That's the people that Braverman and Patel are now squabbling over. The people who will say, no, I don't want anyone to come here. I don't care if he's escaping religious persecution in some East African country. I don't want him to come here. And you need to understand that to understand some of the coverage of this scumbag, this alleged scumbag, Abdul Ezedi. You need to understand the desperation these people have to portray everybody who has come here from overseas or everybody who has applied for asylum as being a wrong 'un. It reminds me of a story of a BBC worker who has thankfully been sacked after sharing horrific anti-Semitic social media posts. She talks about a hollow hoax, which for me should be a criminal offence. She talks about Ashkenazis. She talks about Jewish people being an invader, colonizer species. So she is taking, in this event perhaps, she's taking the activities of the Israeli government, some of the more excessive activities of Benjamin Netanyahu's government, and using it to malign and to attack an entire body of people. Everybody with a Jewish heritage is guilty of these sins. And you see the same thing happening in a socio-political way with stories like this one. Everybody who is an asylum seeker is a potential chemical attacker. And that's what they do, and they do it very deliberately. Very deliberately. And it's important that some of us try to explain this stuff, because the politicians rely upon the voters not understanding it. Because you're never going to win with that constituency over there who don't want anybody coming here ever anyway, and who will jump on board and accept with alacrity the invitation to pretend that everybody, I mean, you heard some of the messages that Rosamond has to put up with. Everybody who is not, I don't know, not white, whatever the phrase is, indigenous tribes in Northern Europe, or whatever racist nonsense you're coming out with this week, that you've got their votes in your back pocket. The votes they're going after are the people that fall for the lie that your ethnicity or your country of origin is somehow an indicator of your character. And that's where the religion comes in. So I've got a horrible feeling, because it's a tough pill to swallow. But if you are going to protect people who face religious persecution in their home countries, then do you also have to protect people who are lying about it? 0345 606 0973. I stopped mentioning my own faith on the programme a while ago for two reasons. One was that it wobbles. It's currently, I lost another very, very close friend recently, and let's just say that it's currently very much in reverse gear, and it comes and goes, and it's not that interesting to you. But the other reason that I stopped mentioning my faith on the programme was because I noticed that all the people in public life who do mention their faith never live by the messages that their faith preaches or teaches. You know, I read about Jacob Rees-Mogg being a prominent Catholic, and I read what Jesus had to say about looking after the poor, or indeed looking after the persecuted, looking after the meek. And I think, well, that's a very different Bible from the one that he's read. So I don't do it anymore for those reasons. And yet, on this subject, I can't see what you do. So this character here, the suspected Clapham chemical attacker, his asylum should have ended the minute he was convicted of two sex offences 3 years earlier. Absolutely, regardless of whether or not he then converted to Christianity. But we're heading towards a really, really tricky question that we've never asked before on the programme. How can you prove you're a Christian?